Om Tat Sat. My humble prostrations to the all-pervading Brahman or God, to my worshipful Guruji, Swami Jyotirmayananda Ji Maharaj, to all the sages and saints of this world, and to each of you divine soul watching today's satsang. Commentaries by my worshipful Guruji, Swami Jyotirmayananda Ji Maharaj, and narrated by myself, Swami Nikhilananda. So today we will be studying Sutra number 35 from the Raja Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and the chapter is Vibhuti Pad. This is a slightly long sutra, and commentaries by my Guruji, Swami Jyotirmayananda Ji. And so let's get started on the sutra. It is Sattva Purushayoha Atyanta Sankirnayoha Pratyaya Avishesho Bhogaha Pararthat Swartha Samyamat Purusha Jnanam. Let's repeat. Sattva Purushayoha Atyanta Sankirnayoha Pratyaya Avishesho Bhogaha Pararthat Swartha Samyamat Purusha Jnanam. So what this means is that the chitta, as we have talked before, is the mind stuff that includes mind, intellect, unconscious, all these, and senses, all these things combined. So, and the Purusha, which is the spirit. Purusha is the spirit or the Atma or consciousness. So these two are totally different. That's what the sutra is trying to guide us. But the perception of the identity of both constitutes enjoyment or bhoga. So when the self is sending the light is getting diffused and the chitta is receiving it, and it's getting mixed up, and we see it all as one. But when we are doing that, through that process we experience bhoga or enjoyment. Bhoga can be pleasure or pain. So therefore we are going through the karma results. In other words, by meditating upon the perception of the self that is different from that of the not self, one attains the knowledge of the spirit. That is called apavarga. So there are two technical words, bhoga and apavarga. So while we are not enlightened, while we are still in the world process and running around doing our things, not knowing the difference between the self and not self, we are doing things as if through prakriti we are being pulled to do things, but we don't know the reasons why. And once we go deeper and understand the mystic meaning of these sutras and we start applying them in our life, then we are clearly able to distinguish how the process is operating. We are breaking down the parts of how the machinery is working to understand, and therefore we know that the self spirit is totally different from the not self. So the Purusha or the spirit is non-active. It is a non-enjoyer and it is unattached. It is a witness. It is pure, immortal and indestructible, and that is the spirit that we are trying to learn about. But due to the presence of the kleshas, remember the 5 kleshas we talked about, asmita, avidya, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha, klesha. That is not what we are going to discuss here, but if you are listening to this video for the first time, please go to Sadhana Pad and pull up Sutra number 3, and it is on a playlist. All you have to do is go to the playlist for some Sadhana Pad and pull up Sutra number 3. I try to keep it as simple and as short and succinct for most of you, because we know people are busy, but also you have to make some time if you really want to make a difference in your knowledge and in your practical life. So the heart is then rendered impure due to the kleshas, due to these 5 kleshas. In the last sutra we talked about the muddy water and the impurity. That's because of these kleshas. These kleshas are the ones that are making us do things as if mechanically. But once we understand and we start working on it, we start improving and evolving. So we had covered this, like a moon in a reflected lake is not visible if the lake is dirty, but if the lake is clean, then you can see the the clarity. The same thing happens in your heart. So when these kleshas are removed, then the vision of the self, the reflection of the self in your heart becomes very visible. Otherwise, the self is there all the time, but the image is not visible due to the kleshas. And due to ignorance, the chitta and the self are identified, though they are totally different. So, just as clouds in the sky are totally different, even so the mind stuff and the spirit are absolutely apart, and it is only due to ignorance that they appear to be identified. So for example, when you look at the clouds, they seem different than the sky, but they're nothing but the sky. When they dissolve, they go back, merge back into the sky. Same thing with the waves in the ocean. We think the waves are different, but then they go back and merge into the ocean as well. Same thing with the self and the not self. Once the not self is we have fully identified it, then it goes back and merges into the self. There is nothing but the self. There is nothing but the ocean. There is nothing but the sky in this example. So the identity of the self and the not self constitutes bhoga. So when we mix the two up, the mind stuff and the self, it becomes the experience of pleasure and pain, or the objective enjoyment. And for this, you may want to read, go back to Sadhana Pad, Sutra number 13. So again, you can pull it from the playlist of Sadhana Pad, Sutra number 13. This is the cause of bondage, the kleshas, and how we do the bhoga aspect. But by meditating on the perception of the self or your Atma, devoid of the fleeting perception of the mind stuff, and by turning the vision to the eternal, so from the transient to the eternal, one attains the knowledge of the spirit. And that is called Atmagyan, consciousness, knowledge of the self. This leads to liberation, mukti, nirvana. So these things are not just buzzwords, they are very real. And that's why my worship for Gurudev is an enlightened master, and we are all walking on that holy journey to gain enlightenment, to get enlightened. Even in this very life, it's very much possible, but we have to give it that priority, that time. And it is here that the role of bhoga ceases. So as soon as the light of the self is visible, bhoga stops. By now you are established in the sattva and then the self, and we are called Jivan Mukta at that time. Whoever is able to attain that light becomes one with that light, although you are living, talking, walking, doing your job, but internally you are now an enlightened master. That is the reward of putting through sincere effort on this process that sage Patanjali is guiding us so lovingly. Human body, as we always say, is a rare thing. So let's not take it for granted and let's not waste time. Let's use this time productively to evolve. So once that happens, we are on the path of apavarga, which means on the process of liberation. And then various other siddhis that arise due to the practice of samyama on the self, and which are precursors to self-realization, are described in the following sutras. So as a yogi advances, he's getting closer and closer to mukti or self-realization. I hope you're enjoying the depth of these sutras, extremely profound, and they are for serious aspirants who want to progress on this holy spiritual path. This is Swami Nikhilananda. Om Tat Sat.